Arizona Territory, 1877, the day Naomi Lark was thrown out of the mercantile. She did not flinch when the door slammed behind her. Dust clouded up around her skirts as she stood there in the sun, back straight, chin high, a burlap sack clutched in her arms. Inside it were the last two shirts that still fit her son, a cracked tin cup and half a loaf of cornbread she had not paid for. "You think you're owed something, don't you?" Mrs. Thornley had hissed before tossing her out. "Good-for-nothing stray, just like your mother." Naomi did not answer her. She never did. Her boots scraped across the dry ground as she walked back toward the edge of town where the land flattened out toward the gulch. The sun was low, dragging long shadows across the dirt. Her son, Peter, was squatting beside the rain barrel when she got back, trying to catch something in a tin can. "Caught a beetle," he said when he saw her. "Good," Naomi replied, brushing his overgrown curls back from his face. "Get your sister. We need to move before night." They had been sleeping under a wagon frame behind the abandoned livery. The owner had died last winter, and no one had claimed the property. But someone had finally boarded up the main barn, and Naomi figured it was only a matter of time before they were run off. Naomi was 23, with more strength in her than most men twice her size, and still, none of it had ever counted for much. Her husband had vanished 2 years ago, after taking the last of their savings to buy a mule. The only thing he left behind was a chipped wedding band and 2 children, Peter, now 6, and baby Nora, barely past her first birthday. Naomi had worked every kind of job a woman could take without selling her body. But in this town, no one wanted a woman with 2 mouths to feed and no husband in sight. "She is good for nothing," someone had once whispered behind her at the post office. Not even good enough to be a whore. She never forgot that, not the words, not who said them, not the way they had all just let it hang in the air like truth. That night, Naomi built a fire out near the gulch, far enough from town to be forgotten. Peter curled up beside her, his hand clutching her skirt. Nora slept on her chest, her breath warm as steam. Naomi stared at the stars, her back to the cold, teeth clenched against the quiet. She did not hear the horse until it was nearly too late. But then came a voice, deep, low, calm. "You planning to shoot me?" Naomi stiffened, her hand already around the handle of the rusted pistol by her knee. "I do not want trouble," she said. "Neither do I," the man replied. He stepped into the firelight, tall, broad through the shoulders. A rifle strapped across his back and a trail-worn hat in his hand. His coat was worn raw at the cuffs. There was dust on his boots and something tired in his eyes, like he had not slept well in a long time. "I saw the smoke," he said. "Only fire out this way for miles. Thought I would make sure no one was hurt." Naomi's mouth was dry. She nodded once. "You live out here?" "No," she said. "We do not. Live anywhere." His gaze dropped to the children. Peter had not stirred, but Nora gave a small whimper in her sleep. "You got family nearby?" he asked. "No. Name's Paxton Field," he said finally. "I have a cabin about 5 miles west. I work cattle for a ranch down near the Verd River, but I keep to myself mostly." She said nothing. "I got an old chicken coop out back," he added. "You can have it for the night." Safer than open ground. Naomi looked at her children, then at the man. "Why would you help?" she asked, voice flat. He looked at her straight. "Because someone should have, a long time ago." She did not trust him, but her children were cold, the wind was rising, and Nora had started to cough. So she nodded once, picked up her daughter, and followed the stranger into the dark. The cabin was nothing more than a single room with a lean-to and a dry well, but it was clean and sturdy. The chicken coop was empty, lined with straw and patched with sailcloth. Paxton brought them a blanket from inside and a jar of honeyed tea he had steeped from wild mint. Naomi sat against the wall, Nora asleep in her arms again. Peter lay curled beside her, the blanket pulled up to his chin. Paxton stood just outside the coop door, hat in his hands. "You look like you need someone to say you are not what they say," he said quietly. Naomi met his eyes. "No one's ever said different." "Well," he said, "then I will be the first." She looked away, jaw tight. "I am not your burden." We will be gone by morning. No one's asked you to be. He walked off after that, back toward the cabin. Naomi listened to the wind and the crack of the branches and the strange, quiet beat of her heart. Paxton did not ask questions. He brought her food the next morning, a heel of bread, 2 boiled eggs, and went about his chores like she was not there. Naomi watched him from the edge of the coop, Nora on her hip. He mended a fence with strong, steady hands. He fed a lame horse with gentle patience. He moved like a man who had known pain and learned how to live around it, not under it. By the 3rd day, Peter followed him everywhere. He shows me the eggs, Peter said, and the way to hold a hammer so you do not smash your hand. Naomi said nothing, but her chest ached. She pulled her weight, cleaned the coop, helped dig the root cellar when Paxton's shovel snapped. She did not ask for thanks. She was not used to it, but he gave it anyway. You are stronger than most men I have known, he said one evening, wiping sweat from his brow. She shrugged. I had to be. He looked at her then, really looked. Not like she was something broken or something used up, just a woman trying to survive. You know, he said slowly, people talk too damn much. Naomi blinked. They say you are good for nothing, he said. But I think they are blind. She stared at him. I think you are the only thing I want, he said, voice rough. And I do not even know how it happened, but I know it is true. Naomi's throat closed. Her hands trembled. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Not once. She stepped back. I am not someone you fix, she whispered. Paxton nodded. Good, because I am not trying to fix you. I just see you, that is all. And for the first time in years, Naomi felt seen. Not judged, not pitied, just known. She turned away fast, afraid he would see the tears in her eyes. But it was already too late. He already had. Paxton didn't bring it up again, what he'd said the night before. He didn't need to. It had settled between them like a shift in the air, unspoken but present. Naomi didn't ask him what he meant, or whether he meant it all the way through. She didn't have room in her chest yet for that kind of wondering. The ground had turned hard from lack of rain, and Paxton's roof needed resetting before the wind came down from the north. Naomi offered her help without ceremony. She tied Nora to her back with a strip of muslin and climbed the ladder like she'd done it 100 times. Paxton passed her the cedar shingles without fuss. They worked in rhythm, and nothing had to be said. Later she found Peter kneeling by the creek behind the cabin, turning stones over with a stick. His cheeks were smudged, his knees scraped. She crouched beside him quietly. There's nothing under them, he said. There usually isn't, she replied. But sometimes there is, he said. A worm. A bug, something. She nodded, brushing his hair off his brow. That's the thing about looking. You have to want to find what others leave behind. He gave her a long look, then went back to his stones. Inside the cabin, Paxton was finishing a stew made from pinto beans and smoked deer. Naomi stayed by the door, watching the way his shoulders moved when he stirred the pot. He glanced up, eyes meeting hers. You ever been north of Prescott? He asked. She shook her head. There's a place up near the rim, he said. Flat stretch of land before the pines start. Good soil. Gets real green come spring. I've been thinking about it. She stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind her. Thinking what? Building something. A house. One with more than one room. She crossed her arms. You don't strike me as a man who needs much. I don't, he said, ladling stew into bowls. But maybe that's the wrong way to live. She took one of the bowls and sat near the hearth. You'd leave this place, if I had reason to. The fire popped. Nora stirred in her sleep. Peter was still outside, chasing daylight. Naomi ate slowly, her body sore from the roof. Her fingers ached from gripping wood. But it was the kind of ache that made her feel solid, like she belonged in her own skin again. Paxton watched her quietly. I don't know what they said about you in town, he said, but I imagine it wasn't kind. She didn't answer. I've seen folks run their mouths about others just to keep from looking at their own wrongs. She looked up then. And what are yours? His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. I let someone die. Wasn't nothing I did, but I didn't try hard enough to stop it. Left me with a quiet I never could shake. Naomi didn't offer pity. She just nodded once, slow and steady. I got mine too, she said, but I'm not sorry for the way I've lived. I did what I had to. I don't think you owe anyone an apology, he said. Peter came in then, dragging a stick and talking about ants. Paxton listened, crouched to his level, and asked real questions about the ants' direction and numbers. Naomi watched them, the way Peter leaned into him like he'd known him longer than a week. That night, Naomi lay in the coop, her children curled against her. She stared at the moon through the cracks in the boards. The air smelled of ash and straw. She could hear Paxton shifting in the cabin, floorboards creaking under his steps. She rose after a time and stepped outside, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She found him on the porch, sharpening a blade on a whetstone. He paused when he saw her. "I can't stay in that coop much longer," she said. "I don't expect you to. I don't like owing anyone. You don't." She looked out toward the dark line of hills. "You said you were thinking about building something. I was. If you meant it," she said, voice even, "I'd like to help." He set the blade down and stood. "You'd have to stay." "I would." He stepped closer, hands at his sides. "And if it's not just the house I want built," she felt the air still between them. "Then I'll still help," she said, "but I'll want my name on the door." His voice was quiet. "Naomi?" "Yes. I don't want a house without you in it." She met his eyes. "Then we build it together." And just like that, something new began, quiet as breath, strong as the land. By the third week on Paxton's land, the nights grew cooler. The smell of creosote came in with the wind, and the stars hung low over the mesa like lanterns. Naomi had begun rising before the sun, stepping out from the coop while her children still slept, her hands already itching for work. She found Paxton in the stretch of dirt behind the cabin one morning, measuring out lines with a length of twine and 2 sharpened stakes. "You're really doing it," she said, brushing her palms on her skirt. "I figure if it's going to stand through winter, we ought to start before the rains," he said, not looking up. "Where do you want the windows?" she asked, walking the perimeter he had traced. He pointed toward the northeast. "There, that way you'll catch the morning light in the kitchen." She didn't answer, only nodded once and crouched to press the line flatter to the earth. Her fingers left clean, strong dents in the dirt. They worked without pause. She lifted beams while Paxton hammered. Peter picked rocks from the soil and lined them along the edge like a border. Nora gummed at a piece of dried peach in the shade of an upturned washtub. They broke only when the heat demanded it, and even then, Naomi barely sat. "You don't rest much," Paxton said one afternoon, wiping his brow with a bandana as they stood beside the new frame. "I don't know how," she replied. He nodded like he understood. "My mother used to say hard work don't fix everything, but it keeps the worst of it quiet." Naomi looked toward him. "Did you take after her, in some ways?" he said. "She had a stubborn streak I used to think was a burden. Now I see it's the only thing that ever got her through." Naomi leaned against the beam behind her, arms crossed. "What became of her? Died during the war." "Fever took hold before they pulled folks from the camps. I was too far north to get back in time." He didn't say more, and she didn't ask. That night, Paxton brought out a wooden box from beneath the cabin floorboards. Naomi sat beside the fire, shelling beans, while Peter dozed beside his sister. "I found this 2 years ago," he said, kneeling down and opening the lid. Inside were seeds wrapped in cloth, some loose, others still in husks. "You planning a garden?" she asked. "I was saving them, figured I'd know when it was time." She reached in and lifted a small pouch between her fingers. "These are beans. You could feed half a county with what's here," he smiled, slow and quiet. "I was hoping you'd say that. I'd like you to have them." Naomi's hand stilled. "Why me?" "Because you'd know how to make something of them. You're the kind that doesn't waste what's been given." She held his gaze for a long moment, then set the pouch back in the box. "I'll plant them come spring, but I want the rows straight, no wandering lines." "That's fair," he said. "But I get to build the fence." The fire crackled between them, and Naomi let her shoulders ease. There was a quiet that came from being seen, not just watched. She hadn't known the difference until now. Later, when she rounded the corner of the cabin to rinse her hands, she found a piece of wood leaned against the wall. It was flat, sanded smooth, with carved letters burned into its face. Lark Field. She traced the letters once. Then again. "You made this?" she asked, finding him behind the barn. He didn't answer right away, just kept brushing down the horse's flank. "I wanted it ready," he said finally. "Figured we ought to have a name on the place before winter." She stepped closer. "My name first? That's how it ought to be." Naomi felt something catch tight in her chest, not fear, not grief, something steadier, something she hadn't felt since before the world had turned hard. "You sure?" she asked. He looked at her, steady and clear. "This place doesn't exist without you." She stood there a long time, the dusk pulling light from the sky, and nodded. Then, without hesitation, she reached for his hand. Not because she had to, but because, at last, she wanted to. The walls went up before the frost came in. Naomi learned the rhythm of Paxton's hammer without needing to glance his way. She could hear from the pitch of each strike whether the nail held or splintered. By October, the house stood framed and roofed, its bones straight and square. They'd left room for a hearth and a lean-to pantry. Nothing fancy, but it would hold. One morning, Naomi found Paxton kneeling at the edge of the cleared plot behind the house, a length of wire stretched between two posts. He was quiet, face drawn in focus, hands steady. She stepped up beside him, Nora balanced on her hip. "You fencing something out or in?" she asked. He set the wire down. "Both." She crouched and set Nora in the grass. "What are you thinking?" "Chickens. Maybe a goat come spring. I can trade for one with a fellow down by the river. He's got more than his pasture can bear." Naomi nodded, brushing straw from her skirt. "You ever keep animals before?" "Just horses. But I figure chickens don't talk back as much." She laughed, a low, surprised sound. Paxton turned his head just enough to catch it, then looked away, ears tinged red. Peter came running from the edge of the trees, breathless. "There's a man coming," he said, pointing toward the trail that wound down from the high ridge. Paxton stood slowly and squinted into the distance. Naomi shielded her eyes. A rider moved steady along the trail, dust rising behind him. A brown coat, wide-brimmed hat, and a rifle slung across his saddle. He wasn't local. Paxton would have known. Naomi stepped behind her son, hand resting at the base of his neck. Paxton didn't reach for his weapon, but his stance shifted. The man came to a stop 10 yards from the house. His boots hit the ground and he tipped his hat. "Looking for a woman named Naomi Lark," he said. Paxton's jaw tightened. "Why?" The man glanced at Naomi, eyes sharp but not cruel. "I ain't here to stir dust, just came to give her something." Naomi stepped forward. "I'm Naomi." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "Your husband's dead." She didn't move. "Found him north of Flagstaff," the man continued. "He'd taken work hauling ore but got into trouble. Cards, likely. He was carrying this." He handed her the paper. Naomi unfolded it. A receipt. Her name, scribbled by a clerk nearly 3 years ago, and a note in her husband's hand. "I'll come back with more." She didn't say anything. "Buried him myself," the man said. "Figured someone ought to know." Naomi tucked the paper into her apron and nodded. "Thank you." The man looked between her and Paxton. "You got someone now?" She didn't look at Paxton when she answered. "I do." The man tipped his hat again. "That's good." He mounted up and rode off without another word. Paxton waited until the dust had settled before speaking. "You all right?" Naomi folded her arms, pressing the paper flat against her chest. "I thought I'd feel something. I don't." He didn't press her. Just leaned against the fence post and watched the wind move through the dry grass. That evening, Naomi sat on the cabin steps, her knees drawn up, the paper beside her. Paxton came to sit next to her, his coat draped over his arm. "I used to think that if a man left, it was because something in me made him go," she said. Paxton didn't speak. "But now I think," she stopped. The words sat heavy. He waited. She tried again. "Now I think some men leave because they never meant to stay. And some men stay without ever saying they will." Paxton looked out toward the gully where the last light of day clung low. "If I ever leave," he said, "it'll be because you asked me to." She turned her face toward his, eyes unreadable in the half-light. "You won't have to," she said. He nodded once, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. He placed it in her hand. She unwrapped it slowly. A ring, simple, plain, shaped by hand, brass with a flat edge and a single notch carved into the inside. "I've never had much," he said. "But I know what I want, and I want you." Naomi closed her hand around the ring. "You sure?" she asked. "I'm not guessing." She looked down at her lap. "Then I reckon I'll wear it." He didn't kiss her then. They weren't in the habit of rushing things. But he reached over, took her hand, and held it. Not like a promise made loud and bright, but like one that had already begun, quietly, without either of them knowing the exact moment it started. Naomi wore the ring without ceremony. She slipped it on the morning after Paxton gave it to her and went straight to the garden plot where the last of the roots needed pulling. Her hands were in the earth when he passed by, carrying a sack of feed on his shoulder. He didn't say anything, but his eyes caught on the curve of her hand, and he gave the smallest nod before heading toward the lean-to. They didn't speak of marriage in the way others might have, as a day to prepare or a gathering to plan. There was no preacher nearby, no church bell to mark the occasion. But Naomi had never cared for noise. What mattered had already been spoken in the work they shared, in the steadiness of his presence, in the way Peter now ran to him first when he scraped his knee. That evening she sat on the porch with a bundle of mending across her lap. The wind blew cooler from the north, carrying the scent of turned soil and mesquite. Paxton sat beside her, whittling a block of cedar into the shape of a bird. "You ever think about the kind of man you wanted to marry?" he asked, shaving off a curl of wood. "I used to," she said, threading her needle. "Thought he'd be someone quiet but not too quiet, strong enough to carry a thing without making me feel small for not lifting it first. Someone who didn't need to speak a lot to be kind." He looked at her. "That sound like someone you know?" She gave a small nod. "It does now." The next day, Paxton rode into the foothills before sunrise. He returned near dusk with a borrowed wagon and a box of supplies tied down under canvas. Naomi helped unload it: flour, lye soap, a tin of kerosene, and a bolt of blue calico. "You can sew a dress from that," he said, handing her the fabric. She turned it over in her hands. "It's too fine for mending." "It's not for mending." He didn't say more, and she didn't press him. But that night, after the children were asleep, she laid the fabric across her lap and ran her fingers over the weave. She hadn't worn anything new since her wedding day, and that had been borrowed from a cousin who'd taken it back before the cake was cut. She thought of how it would feel to wear something of her own making, on her own terms. They decided to marry in the clearing behind the house, under the cottonwood tree that had held its leaves longer than the others. Naomi stitched her dress by firelight, slow and careful, while Paxton carved rings out of juniper and polished them with beeswax. Peter gathered stones to line the path, and Nora toddled through the grass, trailing bits of ribbon Naomi had sewn into her bonnet. A neighbor from the next ridge, an older widow named Mrs. Elkins, came to bear witness. She brought a jar of plum preserves and a Bible with gold-edged pages. When she saw Naomi in the blue calico, she nodded with quiet approval. "You look like a woman who's made her own way," she said. "That's the best kind of bride." Paxton stood beside the tree in his cleanest shirt, hair combed back, boots scrubbed free of dust. His hands were steady. Naomi took her place across from him, her children beside her, and the wind caught the hem of her dress just enough to make it ripple like water. Mrs. Elkins read from the Book of Ruth, and when she said, "Where you go, I will go," Naomi met Paxton's eyes and held them. He reached for her hand, and she took it without hesitation. There were no vows beyond the ones they had already kept in the days before. No kisses until Peter shouted, "Aren't you supposed to do the thing?" And Paxton leaned in and kissed her like the earth had stilled beneath them just to watch. That night, Naomi stood at the doorway of their nearly finished house, the children asleep in the corner room. The moon cast silver light across the floorboards, and the walls smelled of fresh wood and hearth smoke. Paxton came to her side, his hand resting warm at the small of her back. "You ready to call this home?" he asked. She leaned against him. "I already do." He led her inside, closing the door behind them. They grew the garden come spring. The beans sprouted first, then the squash. Naomi taught Peter how to thin seedlings. Nora learned to say her first word egg as she stood wobbling beside the chicken coop Paxton had rebuilt by hand. They lived quiet and steady. Paxton repaired saddles for nearby ranchers, and Naomi traded soap and preserves at the trading post 2 days' ride east. They never spoke of town or the things left behind. There was no need. Every evening, Naomi swept the porch and watched the sky shift from peach to indigo. Paxton would come behind her, arms slipping around her waist, and they'd stand like that while the stars came out one by one. And when the nights turned cold again, and the baby she carried began to stir strong within her, Paxton built a cradle from pine and lined it with wool. She went into labor on a calm morning in late October, with the fire burning low and the windows open to the scent of dry leaves. Mrs. Elkins came to help, and by dusk, Naomi held their daughter in her arms, her skin warm and pink, her cry sharp and strong. They named her Clara, after Paxton's mother. Naomi whispered the name into the baby's ear, and Paxton kissed her temple as she said it. That night they lay in bed, Clara between them, the fire casting soft light across the room. "You've given me everything," Naomi said. Paxton shook his head. "You built it with me." "That's not the same as giving." She reached for his hand and placed it over their daughter's chest, where her heartbeat thudded steady and new. "It is now," she said. And there, in the house they'd raised from bare ground, with their children sleeping safe and the wind quiet against the window, they lived in a love that had no need for words. Just warmth and work, and the kind of peace that only comes when two people have chosen each other not once, but every day after. They never left that land. They never had to.